Hey everyone, it's Anna from The Last Stitch. Are you using a sewing machine but have some struggles not quite getting it right? Well, even though a sewing machine is quite simple to get started with, there are some things that will make a big difference if you do them right. So in today's video, I want to share with you my top beginner tips for how to use a sewing machine. And even if you're not a beginner, I still think you will find this video super useful because it really goes through all the things that you need to know to get a really great result when sewing. One common beginner mistake is that when you are threading the needle, you might actually forget to raise the presser foot because that will release the tension disc. So when you are threading the sewing machine, you will actually be able to get the thread properly inserted in the tension disc. So if you're having some type of wonky tension issues, actually this could be the simple explanation for that annoying cause. So a good rule of thumb, before you thread anything, start by raising the presser foot to release the tension disc. Now, a second thing that I have myself done several times, so you're not alone in this, is that you haven't properly inserted the needle all the way up in that slot that sits inside the needle bar. That's the first mistake. And the second mistake is that you haven't actually properly attached the needle. So you really need to screw that extra so it actually sits firmly inside that slot. You're not alone if you had this happen. I have gone through this myself when I've been sloppy with using this. The sewing machine needle will get sucked inside the fabric and you're like, what's wrong? Well, likely you didn't insert the actually screw it tight enough. Easy mistake to do, but also a very, very easy mistake to fix. Then we're going to start actually thread the machine. So you start of course by placing it on the pin, and then depending on your sewing machine you use these thread guides to make sure that it's properly placed. And when you reach this point, this is the tension disc. If you're unsure about that it's properly placed, just do like you would floss your teeth. Just floss the thread a little bit like this, back and forth, to make sure that it actually sits properly in the tension disc. And then you just keep threading it the way you would do. Make sure you don't miss any thread guides. Again, check your sewing machine manual because there's so many different ways of doing this. So mine is very simple, some are a little bit more complicated, but definitely check your manual so you don't miss any of those steps. And then of course we have the bobbin thread. Check your manual again for how to wind the bobbin. I will give you one advice, then that is to make sure that you don't overfill the bobbin thread with thread. I mean, many sewing machines, including my old, actually have an automatic function that has a sensor that once the bobbin is full, it actually stops winding. But if your machine doesn't have that function, or just to be on the safe side, make sure that you stop a little bit before the bobbin is full, because if you do that, you will make sure that there is no friction inside the bobbin, so it will make sure that the thread has a smooth movement inside the bobbin, which is very, very important for a great result as well. So once you have threaded the needle and the bobbin, one more important thing you need to know before you start sewing, and that is very simple but again so important, that is to pull back the threads behind the sewing machine. Because if you have those threads, lying, one is lying, in the front direction and one is on the side, the chance or the risk is that when you start sewing, those threads will tangle up and create like this tangled mess that will, if worst case, actually get sucked inside underneath the plate here and inside that bobbin storage, and you will end up with a big mess. So just that very simple step of pulling the thread back will make a big difference. Let's talk about a very important topic, and that is understanding tension. A lot of sewing machines make the bold claim that they have automatic tension and that your sewing machine will just sense what type of fabric or thread you're using and then automatically adjust the tension for beautiful stitching regardless of material and notion. And while I do think that that's true for many cases, I will also argue that sometimes you need to manually adjust the tension for best result. So for instance, if you're using heavier thread in the needle, you will need to increase tension, and if you're also using thicker fabric, you will also likely need to adjust the tension. So these are a couple of examples of where it's really good. And now of course you're like, what is tension? Well, I'm going to show you now how to really understand how tension relates to sewing. So in this first sample you can see that the needle tension is too low. And why, you may ask? Well, if you look, you can see that there are some really pronounced loops that are formed on the reverse side or the underside of the fabric. That means that it's just too much needle thread, and that is caused by the fact that the needle tension is too low. Then we have another problem, which is not quite as common, but you can also encounter that, and that is that the needle tension is too high. And then you have the reverse thing happening. You will actually end up getting bobbin thread loops on the right side of the fabric. So that's why it's also good, like I'm doing here, to use a different color thread in the needle and in the bobbin, because then you're actually able to gauge where the tension has gone wrong. Because if you're using matching thread, you might need to have a magnifier, because normally of course you will stitch on a fabric using a color of the thread that is as similar as you possibly can as the color of the fabric, so those tension issues won't be as visible. But that's why I do recommend that you actually, if you want to make sure that your stitch is top notch, that you definitely do some samples using this method I show you here. Alright, now I showed you what is too little needle tension and too much, but well, how does balanced tension look like? Well, it's actually quite intuitive. It means that even if you look up close, you will not see hardly anything of either the needle thread on the reverse side or the bobbin thread on the right side of the fabric. That means you have actually achieved a balanced tension. So do strive for that, and remember, sometimes you will not get it 100% exact, because you know, fabrics, thread, it's tricky, but definitely give tension your attention, because that's one of those great easy ways to achieve a stitch on your sewing machine that looks so professional and neat. So I do recommend that you move beyond the order tension and really dive into this topic and see how manually adjusting tension can actually affect the end result. And now it's finally time to start sewing. So what you do is that you of course insert the fabric, you lower the presser foot, and here's another tip. Do make sure that the needle will hit the fabric. And of course then you need to backstitch on most stitches, because if you don't backstitch, well, there's a big risk that the stitch will unravel. So you just backstitch to the edge of the fabric, and then you go forward, and now you have a secure seam. Now, sewing straight, that is not easy when you're starting out. That takes a lot of practice. The good news is that I've done dedicated videos where I show you so many tools and tricks for how to sew straight. A lot of those you will find in your home for free, and otherwise are really inexpensive to get. So I highly recommend that after you watch this video, that you hop over and watch that video as well, to really level up your straight stitching. But to give you an overview here, that you should first of all, of course, check all the stitch guide that you will likely have on your plate. Some sewing machine even have like a built-in ruler system on the bed of the sewing machine. But if not, I do recommend that you use some type of seam guide. It could be a stack of post-it notes, it could be a piece of Lego, it could be some tape, whatever works for you, a magnetic seam guide. Try all those things, and don't be embarrassed about that, because I have sewn for over 30 years and I still rely on the tools that I mentioned to sew straight. So there's no shame in not being able to do that, because we all can do with a little bit of help. So another thing that can only come with practice is to learn how to control the fabric. So you need to get like a good grip on the fabric. So that comes with almost a little bit like developing a sixth sense of different type of fabrics. But a general rule is that I like to pinch the fabric edge with my thumb and my index finger, and then use the other hand to gently guide the fabric to make sure that I keep it straight, because that gives me control, but it's not too firm, because you have to be quite soft in your movements. You should never ever pull or tag the fabric or force it to feed anywhere. You need to gently guide it through the sewing machine, confident but not too aggressive, if that makes sense, because that can also lead to things like skip stitches, or if you're sewing with stretchy fabric, you might actually risk getting the fabric to stretch out in a way that won't be restored. So gently guide the fabric with your hand, gentle but firm. I think that's a good rule when it comes to really controlling the fabric when you are sewing. And once you're done sewing, of course, again, secure, backstitch, release the tension by lifting the presser foot, pull the fabric back quite a bit, and then you cut the threads. And here you go. You have sewn and set up your machine for success. So following these super simple, very basic, but oh so important tips, I can assure you that you will achieve great success. And remember that patience and practice are key components for making beautiful stitching on your regular sewing machine. Thank you so much for watching. Stitch safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye!